I forgot my shoes. I didn't really. If you saw me earlier, you know I was wearing shoes. But I left them backstage for a really important reason and far away from all the people who were back there so they don't have to smell them. I do have some shoes up here I will refer to. So what I'm going to talk about for the first 3 minutes is probably going to sound totally crazy and unrelated to anything that this message could possibly be about, but I promise I'm going to get to the point and it'll make sense later. When I was 20 and 21, toward the end of college, I started running for the first time to enjoy it. I had to do it in high school PE class and hated it and thought it was the worst thing ever. But I was never a very good athlete. I liked sports, but I was not good at them. So when I was 20, I started going to the Whitesville Road track and running. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't research shoes or anything like that. The cheap shoes that I already owned and wore all the time, I wore whatever clothes I happened to be wearing, but I just started really liking it. And there was a police officer who went there to run sometimes, and he found this perfect sweet spot of he'd talk to me, but he also, I think, could tell I was an introvert and didn't really want to talk a lot, so it was always just very pleasant. How's it going? And then after I saw him several times, he would start to give me very gentle feedback and suggestions about how to get better at running. I started getting better at it. I did that until I was done with college, lost a good bit of weight that I promptly gained back in graduate school. When I finished graduate school, 9 years later, I needed to get back into it because, school was no longer an issue getting in the way. Well, my 32-year-old body did not respond the same as my 20-year-old body did to running. And so I researched it, and I looked into shoes. You may be able to see even from there, I am super flat-footed. And they have very specific recommendations for what kind of shoes to wear if you have flat feet. So you should have a really cushioned shoe, and you should have, there's some they make that have a sort of metal wall in here, because when you run, you hit your heel and your foot rolls in, and that can hurt your feet. And so I got those shoes, and it didn't help. In fact, it was kind of worse because it hurt my feet because they kept slamming into those little walls and stuff like that. And, I was sore every time I was done. I was not enjoying it. I hated it. And then I discovered barefoot running, hence the bare feet. And so it doesn't mean necessarily literally running barefoot, but they make these shoes that a lot of you probably saw me wear for a very long time. They are pretty much like being barefoot, not exactly the same. You actually wear through them very quickly, which is why I'm not still wearing them because I'd be broke. But I loved them, and the idea of barefoot running is this. When you have this big old shoe, this is not mine, this is my husband's, but my feet are almost this big. But it's got all this cushion here, all this padding, and it's removing all the feedback that your feet get when they make contact. It's protecting them. And there is a lot of good reason to do that, and I'm not telling you throw your shoes away and go run barefoot because it's something you have to research and get into slowly. But when you're running in shoes like this, because most of the cushioning is here, you land here, you can see how my leg is straight, and so that puts all this energy all the way up my leg, hurts your knees, it hurts your hips, so even if it doesn't hurt while you're doing it, very often it's going to hurt later because you've been doing that over and over again. When you get rid of that, and you don't have this big cushion on your heel when you're running, you will not run that way. Because if you are barefoot and you land on your heel really even once, you're mm-mm. And so you change the way you run. And so getting the feedback stuff actually being able to hurt your foot when you run the wrong way causes you to take shorter steps. Your feet stay under you. You can land more like here, which is much better. Even if you have flat feet, the flat feet aren't really getting bothered by it. And so the feedback is what the shoe was removing in order to run in a way that my body can keep doing now into my 40s and hopefully into my 50s and 60s and 70s. I know I don't look like a runner, but I promise I run. And I love it. It's my meditation time. But that shoe keeps me from getting the feedback that will let me adjust and then make this something I can continue to do for my whole life. Because I don't have knee issues. Even being a heavier runner, my knees don't bother me from running this way. They definitely bothered me in those kind of shoes. So I promised I was going to tell you we actually, take this back around to the point. And today we're going to talk about the importance of feedback and seeking out relationships that give us feedback about the things that are important to us. So feedback involves some pain, right? Because when I first started running without the shoe to protect me, you feel everything. You feel all the little rocks. You change where you run so there's not as much gravel and things like that. But it has positive consequences, ultimately. And even the stuff that's not hurting you immediately, you're protecting yourself from the long-term damages. So if something's important to us, and if it's something we want to get better at, we should position ourselves to receive feedback. if we're going to get better. It's really hard to get better at anything without feedback. And that includes following Jesus. If we want to do that better, if we want to do a better job of living the way we're called to as followers of Jesus, we have to be able to get feedback. And then the question becomes, how do we do that? How do we position ourselves to get that kind of feedback? Because here's the thing, if we want to get better at following Jesus, loving other people, because that's the goal, it's not always an easy answer about what to do in a given situation. We can act like that's a really easy thing. We'll just do what's going to make you love other people. There are times where there's a lot of competing things. Who is it more important for us to love? How do we decide whose needs are more important in this situation? I guarantee you anybody in a leadership position in the last year has been struggling with this. And all the decisions we get mad about that the people above us make about how to do things in our job or our school or our church or whatever it is, they have been trying to figure out how do we protect other people, love other people, but still also do what we're supposed to do and meet the needs we're supposed to meet. And there's not always an easy answer to that. Feedback is a good way to get closer to that answer. But we can't act like we just refer to that Bible verse and then we're going to magically know what to do, because we don't. We need people to help us see the right thing. Seeing it from only our own perspective is very limiting. So we need to be able to take on other people's perspectives that we value. So we're using a table to talk about how we can get this kind of relationship, what kind of traits this kind of relationship is going to have, why it matters. So I'm going to start us off with a passage from 2 Corinthians just to sort of give us some context, and then we'll talk about what do we want to look for in the people that we table with, and we'll talk about table as a verb in a second too. So 2 Corinthians 1, 3 through 5, this is from the Message translation. I'll be doing a couple different translations for some of the verses, but we're just going to do the one here. All praise to the God and Father of our Master, Jesus the Messiah, Father of all mercy, God of all healing counsel. He comes alongside us when we go through hard times, and before you know it, he brings us alongside someone else who is going through hard times so that we can be there for that person just as God was there for us. We have plenty of hard times that come from following the Messiah, but no more so than the good times of his healing comfort. We get a full measure of that too. And I want to, draw your attention to that idea of, first, God comes alongside us, and he's preparing us to come alongside someone else to help them through something. And it may not even always be the thing that we went through exactly, but it can be something that we've got the perspective that they need to help them, or even just to listen to. But we're all really uniquely equipped with different traits, personalities, knowledge, experiences, perspectives, passions, all of those things. And so that helps point out our need for these other people. So we are limited. We are not God. Sometimes we might forget. We're not God. We cannot know everything. We cannot know everyone's perspective and experience. We are just limited to either what we have actually personally experienced or the things we are aware of in other people's. But letting go of that idea that we can know everything and have an answer for everything is really important. And we may have that piece that someone else needs, just like they may have the piece that we need. And that's the second aspect of this. So especially the more you get to know yourself and your own limitations, the more you're going to get a sense of when you need to ask for somebody else's feedback or perspective on something. If you know me, you probably know I'm pretty weird. And there are things that I'm aware of that I don't think about these things the same way other people do. This will probably sound totally out of character in some ways for some people, and other people will be like, oh yeah, that fits. But this year I volunteered to be the room mom in my son's preschool Montessori class, which most people are like, wow, you picked that? So, and it was it was a new school for him, and I wanted to just get involved and know who people were. And the main part of the job was actually something totally in my wheelhouse. My top love language is gifts. And I love putting together gifts for other people. And a big part of it was that they're like, this is such a hard year for these teachers. They're having to make all these adjustments. So whoever's doing this would organize putting together teacher appreciation gifts, give them a gift once a month. Not anything big, but just to keep reminding them, we really appreciate you and we see you. But there's a lot of other things that were involved, like arranging get-togethers that are safe and socially distanced for outside of school. That is not me. And I don't think anybody is surprised. I'm not a very good social person. I have no social barometer for what's normal. I just proudly declare myself socially awkward so people understand that it's not them in those kinds of situations, that it's just me and I'm an introvert and I'm sorry. So there is another mom who I actually know from New Community from way back when we were teenagers and college age who's got a kid in the class. And so I have taken to anytime I'm planning something, I send her a message. Does this sound normal or does this sound weird? Because I feel like she is a much better sense of like what normal people do. And so I ask her before I send an email or try to, make a plan for the class and stuff, because I'm like, I have no idea if this is going to sound crazy to other people or if it's going to be something that they want to do. And that's just one of the many, like what I would call infirmities on my part that I've started to become aware of and be more proactive about. If I'm going to do confrontation, I try to do it in writing and I try to get other people to look at it first, because I know that I come off very harsh when I'm writing. I use lots of big words, and I know I need to tone it down, but I'm not always the best one at figuring that out. And so there are times I really need other people's perspective to help me like preserve relationships and things like that. And then there's times I can fill that gap for other people. And that's the idea of this relationship, is that you can do it both ways. Like you may be able to fill a gap for someone else, or they may be able to fill in one of your gaps. In pursuit of some particular goal. So today we're going to talk about tabling as a verb, and so it's something we're going to do, and table. What we're going to do is talking about the relationship as coming to a table, and I really like this particular table setup for what I'm talking about today, but we need to find people to table with. So we're not talking about tabling as putting something to the side, but table as in come to the table to be fed, in this case, more spiritually and relationship-wise rather than food-wise, though you can eat at the same time, you can multitask. And I also want to stress as like a caveat for this, I'm not telling you not to be friends with other people who do not meet the definition I'm going over here. Okay, so it's not saying only be friends with people who meet the definition we're going over, it's more find people who meet this definition to be part of your circle. Okay, so I don't want to give the idea that I'm telling you only be friends with Christians and they have to have these particular traits. That's not what I'm telling you. Those other relationships are very important too. The idea is make sure you have included people who meet this definition as part of your group of relationships and friends. So to talk about what we need from the people that we table with is we're going to talk about 4 traits. The first 2 I'm going to talk about together. And to introduce this, we're going to start with a passage from Acts 2, which, if you're familiar with Acts, this part is talking about the early church. A lot of churches today try to use this model because it is a very healthy and relational model that would meet a lot of people's needs if we could recreate it. But it does at least give us some goals to shoot for. So this is Acts 2, 41 through 47. That day, about 3,000 took him at his word, were baptized, and were signed up. They committed themselves to the teaching of the apostles, the life together, the common meal, and the prayers. Everyone around was in awe. All those wonders and signs done through the apostles, and all the believers lived in a wonderful harmony, holding everything in common. They sold whatever they owned and pooled their resources so that each person's need was met. And especially want to focus on this last section. They followed a daily discipline of worship in the temple, followed by meals at home, every meal a celebration, exuberant and joyful as they praised God. People in general liked what they saw. Every day they saw their number grew as God added to those who were saved. And so the 2 aspects that we're looking for in the people that we table with that I want to talk about in this case. Number 1, you're looking for people with the shared goals of trying to love God and love others better. You need people who are headed in the same direction as you, rather than people who are standing still or people who are headed in a different direction. So the idea of the people who meet this specific definition of a particular type of relationship you want to cultivate are going to be trying to move forward and do this better. And I think if we're being honest, we all know you never completely arrive at this, you just get better. And getting better at it takes a lot of effort, a lot of battling our own first instincts. The second thing I want to lump in here to talk about is just this aspect of friendship and fellowship. You got to like the people you're hanging out with. Because you're not going to want to be around them if you don't like them. And I think it's okay to say you can love people that you don't like very much, but that doesn't mean you need to spend time with them. And then there's also going to be people who you're friends with and whose company you totally love who are not headed in the same direction. This is not a time in their life that they're pursuing Jesus, and they're not pursuing improving the way that they're serving God, loving other people, and that's okay too. You can still be friends with them. You can still love the people that you don't really like. But for this type of relationship, you got to like being around them, because otherwise you're going to avoid being around them, and that's not going to serve a purpose at all. Because, there's people who are just, you're not going to click with, whose personalities are just kind of in opposition to yours. I have a hard time with super extroverted people, and I work with one that I really struggle with. If I had to be around him outside of work, I would have a hard time. And I'm trying my best to love him and understand that a lot of the things that I have a hard time with are not things he's choosing. It's just personality traits that weren't chosen. And so being more gracious, but still being like, I've had enough of that by the end of my workday. I'm good now, and I'm going to go home. So he would not be the one I'm inviting to go have coffee with me. And I know I am not everybody's cup of tea. I'm not. I feel like I'm very much an acquired taste. I know I have been told I'm intimidating. I don't mean to be, but somehow I am anyway. And that's okay that there's people who are not going to want to hang out with me, and that is cool. And again, I'm an introvert, so the fewer people who want to, generally, the better it goes for me. But it's okay to be choosy about the people and find the people who you click with, who you feel comfortable around, because some of these other steps, you can't go through these other steps on the list unless you are comfortable with these people and like them. So that is an important part of it. And that description in Acts 2, that idea of how these people were just so enamored with who they're following and who they're around, they're so joyful and exuberant, and then that's attracting other people because people like seeing that. I want that too. Like, that's how we should feel about these relationships. It shouldn't feel like a job. It should feel like something that we are benefiting from and we look forward to. The third thing we're going to talk about comes from Proverbs. I'm going to use two different translations of this one just because I like seeing other different ways of explaining it. So the Message version says, you use steel to sharpen steel, and one friend sharpens another. This is Proverbs 27:17. I don't remember if I said that. And then the one you probably heard is the iron sharpens iron. As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. And this is the one we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail. That idea of two of the same material being used to sharpen each other is really important. And I think in this kind of relationship, that sense of equality is really important. I love that this table is set up this way because there is no head to this table, right? There's an equality in the way that it is set up. It's not one person learning from another. If you've ever set up an office, I had someone I worked with who was so frustrated he couldn't find a way to arrange his office so that the desk was not in between him and the student, because he was so concerned it was going to seem like he's trying to be an authority figure, and he wants, because it's conferences about writing, he wants it to feel more of an equal relationship, and he couldn't figure out a way to do it physically in the space. Using a table like this helps emphasize that. It's supposed to be one of equality, a relationship of equality and of mutuality. So it's mutual need, it's mutual respect. It's not one person teaching and the other one following, although there will be times where one person has the experience or the perspective to help the other, but the other one is going to get a turn too. That's the idea. It's never just one person helping the other. If that happens over a long period of time, we would actually call that a pretty unhealthy relationship. So there needs to be a back and forth, and I'm saying this as somebody who struggles with that so much because I like to always have the answers. I don't like to ask for help. So I'm preaching to me too, just understand that. But I do want to say, we use that expression equally yoked sometimes about, I think a lot of times we just tie it to marriage, but I think it applies in a lot of relationships. But especially in this kind of relationship, you do need another believer, and another believer with the same goal of like moving forward and growing spiritually, rather than someone who's like, it's cool, I go to church, I'm good. That person's not going to help you grow, because that's the thing. And we'll get into this more with number 4, but if that person is not willing to give you any resistance, there is no sharpening happening. If they just, let you bounce off and they're fine with everything you say, there's no growth, there's no sharpening taking place. That's why I like that verse for this idea. And then going back to what we said in number 1 and number 2, the goal has to be the same for there to be equality. They're both made of the same material. One is able to sharpen the other and vice versa. You should still enjoy each other's company because, again, you need to be able to fall back. If they tell you something that you're having a hard time hearing, you need to be able to fall back on that love you have for that person and that respect you have for that person. If you don't enjoy being around them, that will become a very easy exit ramp to not listen to what they have to say. And so, going back to the feedback idea, it needs to be people who are willing to both give and receive feedback, because you need that mutuality and that equality there. So it needs to be someone who is willing to share what they're struggling with and listen to what you have to say. And then you have to be the same way back to them. You have to be willing to both give and receive in order to grow. And the fourth concept, this is one we'll spend the most time on probably, I'm going to use Ephesians 4, verse 15 to talk about this one. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way, more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body and the church. And I want to focus in specifically on speak the truth in love. All those other things have been moving toward this idea of you have to be able to be truthful. You need a solid relationship. To do that, you have to be headed in the same direction and have the same goals to give someone the truth that is going to help them grow in the way that they're seeking to grow. And so what you need, this fourth trait, is vulnerability and honesty, which I did a whole message on vulnerability a while back that made me very uncomfortable because I'm not good at being vulnerable, so I put it in here to make myself remember that I have to work on it. So again, it works in both directions, but it only works if there's shared vulnerability and honesty on both sides. So it can't be one person who's super willing to be vulnerable and sharing with the other person while the other person is closed off. Going back to the shoe, like the shoe is basically like a piece of armor for your foot. And it's much more comfortable in the short term to run in a shoe like this. Absolutely, because you're not feeling every little rock. You don't have to adjust because you can land however you want in this shoe and it's probably going to feel okay. But there's a lot of times long-term consequences of, wearing the armor in the short term, protecting yourself in the short term, but not opening yourself up to adjustment. And that's, where the other person comes in. So it may be more comfortable in the short term to resist feedback or not open ourselves up to feedback, not be vulnerable. But if we're doing that, we're not getting feedback and we're not growing. So this is definitely a struggle for me, this idea of feedback. I'm a perfectionist. I like to help other people, but I don't like to ask for help myself. And so I'm very free with giving feedback. I struggle with receiving it. And from any source. And I know other people who struggle with this. This might be some of you guys as well. When somebody gives you some kind of correction, your first instinct might be to be defensive and be like, they're wrong. Let me tell you all the reasons why they're wrong. You might not tell them, but you might tell another person. I get emails sometimes from work, from students, where it's sort of a question, but it's very accusatory and making it sound like I did something wrong. And my first instinct is always, what's wrong with them? If they had just come to class, they would know the answer to this question. And my first instinct is to tell them why they're wrong. And what I have been working on is considering those moments feedback for me. Maybe this can be something, if you have this particular struggle like I do, I don't always say this out loud, but I have tried to work on the practice of saying in my head, thank you for this feedback. Because if I'm thinking of it as feedback rather than an accusation or an attack, it helps me figure out what can I do differently. And so when that student, I had an exchange with a student, I think it was last spring. I was running a writing exam. All the students have to pass before they graduate. And they have to sign up ahead of time. They got to pick the time. I got to set them up in the system to be able to see the exam at the right time and the correct questions for them and so on. And this girl had gotten 3 different emails from me telling her, you need to go fill out this form and sign up for your time. 3 different times. I sent the first one to everybody. Second time, I sent another one saying, okay, I still didn't get an answer from you, so I need you to please go fill this out as soon as possible so that I can get you set up in the system. She never filled it out. And then I sent out one more like 2 days before the test. If you're going to take the test, and I see you're a senior, I think you've got to, please fill this out. Nothing. And then 5 minutes into her exam time that she never signed up for but just decided she was going to attend, she emailed me saying, the test is not showing up for me, and I don't know who's responsible for this, but if some sort of technical issue keeps me from graduating, then there's going to be a problem. And I did not do the best at choosing how I responded, and so my response was the first time was a list of all of the times and dates I had emailed her, telling her, and phrasing it as, if somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do, it was you. Okay, so that was not my best moment. And I am, now that I've had some distance, not in the moment, very grateful for the fact that she emailed me back and said, I am just a senior who's trying to graduate. There was no need for you to be this harsh. And at first I was just like, whoa, let me tell you why there was. But I sat with it for a minute and really started thinking about it. And I'm like, no. And because I was very trapped in my own perspective in that moment, which was I have spent weeks trying to get all these students in the system and spending hours of time doing tedious things, setting this all up. And I also know I've sent all these emails. I did not take the time to think about the fact that these students are getting like 50 emails a day. All their teachers, every time they post something, will send them an email telling them there's another thing on Blackboard. If you're trying to graduate, you're probably taking more classes than normal, so you have even more emails. And so I didn't take the time to think about maybe it was just really easy for her to get overwhelmed with her email, like I very often am as well. And so I wrote back and said, you are absolutely right. That was really uncalled for on my part to say it that way. Here's the perspective I was coming from, and here's what I also took away from the way you phrased it, trying to tell me I didn't do what I was supposed to do when I did. Like, I still included that, but I've started, that experience has caused me to start responding to students so differently. And every time they've got a question, I don't always have the time to put in the effort, but most of the time now, I'm trying to find ways to be like, thank you so much for asking this question, because you're letting me know that I didn't communicate it. Maybe I said it in class, but I'm not going to remind you of that. I might say, I see you haven't been coming to online class, and I did talk about it in there, so if you want to start making that part of your weekly schedule to attend class, probably I'll answer, but like, you know, I'm still being passive-aggressive probably a little bit, but I'm trying to tell them I'm glad they're asking the questions, because I want them to feel like they can. And me setting that up as, when you ask me a question, you're helping me figure out what I'm not explaining as well as I thought I was explaining, has changed my perspective, and I think it's helping at least some of them who are really hesitant to ask questions feel like questions are a normal thing. And we all need that. We all need people to be able to ask us questions, and that's all part of feedback. And so that idea of training ourselves to respond to feedback with gratitude instead of defensiveness, I think is really important. If you can bring that to relationships with other people who are chasing the same goals as you are, that helps you grow, because you're going to train yourself to be more open to what other people have to say. So I say this to sort of introduce this idea. If you're not getting feedback from other people who you are tabling with, you may want to start by asking, am I setting myself up as receptive to feedback, or can they sense my armor and realize they're not going to be able to say this to me? Sometimes the issue if we're not getting feedback is us, and I say that sometimes it's me, and I know it's me because I struggle with getting that feedback. So we want to make sure we're making it clear we're open to feedback from other people. If the issue is not us, if we have made it clear we're open to hearing other perspectives, we want some pushback and things like that, and we're not getting it, then we need to consider, do we have the right people at our table? Because if our table is an echo chamber, and it's only other people who are agreeing with us about everything, and tell, oh yeah, totally, because they're the same way, and they want to feel like this is just the way everybody's supposed to be, then those might not be the people to help us grow. If they're perpetuating unhealthy ways of thinking or unhealthy habits, that is not a relationship that's going to help us grow. We need people who will push back, who will create that resistance to help us be sharpened, right? So we want to make sure that we have people at our table who will take the other point of view and challenge us a little bit, or give us their perspective. And then when we're giving the feedback, we want to make sure that we're being honest, honest about ourselves, honest about our own limitations, our own limited experience. Some of you may have heard the expression, stay in your lane. I think that's really good advice when it comes to giving people advice. You want to make sure that you're not trying to act like you know everything, because none of us can possibly know everything. It's okay to say, I've never experienced this. Here's what I'm hearing from you, and here's maybe what I would do, but I also can say, I've never had to experience this, and I don't know what that's like. I was talking to some students this week. If you don't know, I teach at Tuskegee, so a majority of my students are African American. and we were talking about parenting. We're reading a novel about Native Americans living in Oakland, present day. It's called They're There by Tommy Orange. It's a really good book. But it was talking about one of the native, she's like a great aunt, but raising her sister's grandsons and talking about her way of parenting. She knows she's harsh and too hard, but she feels like she's better protecting them for the world that's going to, try to hold them down or have lower expectations or expect them to fail or put them in a box or whatever. And she feels like being hard on them is helping prepare them better for the real world when they grow up. And this is just not something that I have to struggle with, because I'm raising a little white boy and I have a teenage stepdaughter, and they do not face the same issues. And so I need to say, I don't get to have an opinion about the right way to raise a kid with dark skin in this country, because I don't have to do it. I can talk about what I can do to make life easier on other people based in the way that I'm raising my child to treat them, but I don't get to have an opinion about that. And I have gotten better at acknowledging, I think, I'm still definitely not perfect, but I'm trying to get better at staying in my lane and going, this is something I don't get to have an opinion about. Because I don't get to have an opinion about everything because I don't experience everything. And sometimes that's the best thing we can do, is to also say, I got nothing. I can't tell you what to do in this situation because I cannot imagine what it's like to be in that. And maybe in that case, our position comes to be supporting someone else and what they're going through rather than telling them what they should do. Maybe we're a sounding board in that case. But we need to realize that we are not going to be everything for everyone. We need to know what we can say and what we cannot say. It's okay to say, I don't know, and not to try to tell someone what they should do when you don't know the situation. So that is part of honesty and vulnerability to me, is also acknowledging when we don't have an answer. And that's pretty important too. So I'm going to wrap us up with, this is from Ephesians. Also, it's the full section that the previous verse came out of, and it's from the Message translation rather than the New Living, because I really like the way it ends, and I wanted to share it with you because it brings us back to the table. So Ephesians 4:14 through 16. No prolonged infancies among us, please. Will not tolerate babes in the woods, small children who are easy prey for predators. God wants us to grow up, to know the whole truth, and tell it in love, like Christ in everything. We take our lead from Christ, who is the source of everything we do. This last part's what I want to focus on. He keeps us in step with each other. His very breath and blood flow through us, nourishing us so that we will grow up healthy in God, robust in love. So we come to tables to take in food to help us grow physically, to nourish us. We try to eat healthier foods, maybe don't always succeed because those are going to nourish our bodies more effectively. This also applies in tabling in a relationship sense. We need to have some relationships in our lives that nourish us spiritually, that they are people who we know are following the same God, on the same path of trying to improve and grow, and who we know we can trust to give us that kind of feedback and honesty that we need to grow. And then that's how we grow spiritually. And without those kind of relationships, it's really easy to just stop growing and just stay where we are because it's comfortable, because it's like running in the padded shoe, and it doesn't cause us a lot of pain if we don't have to look at things we might be doing incorrectly or get feedback on something or admit that we don't know everything. And so we need those people. And so the reason we come to the table to eat is the same reason that we need to have those relationships that help us grow. I do want to, I guess, wrap up with a little bit of a caveat that I realize this is not necessarily the time that all of us need to be going into each other's houses and sitting around a table because we're worried still about a pandemic. And so I just want to acknowledge, I'm not telling you just throw caution to the wind and start going out to restaurants and meeting people if that is not in your comfort zone. Please do not do that. There are other ways we can be creative and think outside the box to make sure that we are at least sustaining those relationships if we're not in a position to really spend the time with people to really fully take advantage of the relationships. We can still be maintaining those relationships. I don't know about you guys, but I've had a hard time in the last year sustaining friendships because I'm very overwhelmed with everything taking way more time than it used to, and all of the physical distance is just harder. And I have not done the best job of keeping in touch with people who I would normally see regularly and talk to regularly, and it's something I need to work on sustaining those until we get to a time where everyone's comfortable, like actually being around each other and really physically fellowshipping, but it doesn't mean we have to just put this off. There are ways to still be working toward this now. And I also want to say, New Community is a perfect place to find these relationships because it's such a unique church. It's so easy for churches to just become like those echo chambers I was talking about, where everybody's they all have really similar life experiences, similar perspectives and political leanings and all of those things. And it can be hard to find relationships to establish and develop with people in that church. If everybody's already the same, you're not going to be able to sharpen each other the same way. And so this is such a perfect place to find those relationships and form those relationships, because you will be able to meet people and form relationships with people who do have such different life experiences and perspectives. That's always been what New Community is about. It's one of the coolest things ever. Why I've been so glad to have had this be such a big part of my life growing up. So take advantage of that in whatever ways it comes up. I know the men are still meeting. Lewis, I see you there. So when are they meeting? Mondays. Okay, so there's a men's group already. There's several others. They're wearing masks, still safe, but it's still a way to get around other people and talk about what issues are coming up for you and hear these different perspectives to figure out, what should you do or how should you think about this differently. So take advantage of it. This is a perfect place to be. So I'm going to wrap us up in prayer, and then I think they're going to do one more song. God, thank you so much for this very special church and how it's always been a place where people, regardless of their different backgrounds, their different appearances, their different economic statuses, their different political leanings, have all left that aside to come follow you and chase one particular goal of growing to be more like your son and doing a better job of loving each other, loving the community, bringing about heaven on earth. So thank you for this place that creates this foundation where people can form these relationships. So as we go out this week, help each of us really consider, do we have people we're tabling with in this sense? That we have these relationships with people who can help us grow to be more like your son, to do a better job loving the people around us. Help us figure out, if we have those people, what can we do to keep in better touch with those people? If we don't have those people, help us start looking for those people, reaching out and establishing those relationships that are going to help nourish us so that we can grow to help bring about your kingdom on earth. Amen.